My boss said I was incompetent until my client refused to work with anyone else. I had 10 minutes before my first sync with the client's team. I opened the doc I'd been building in stolen time. Risk register V3. 3 lines glowed red. 1. Double identifiers in the event stream could inflate KPIs. 2. Consent state not propagated for users migrating from legacy app. 3. A convenience shortcut. Sergey had proposed that disabled a validation step to make Friday's demo smoother. I'd already tried to get Maxim to sign this off yesterday. He'd commented, "You're catastrophizing. Remove red flags. It reads like drama." He'd then resolved the thread himself, leaving my doc shorter and me smaller. After the call, Slack roared. Maxim created a channel without me, then forgot and changed the name in front of everyone. I watched the notification pop and vanish, a little ghost of exclusion. Then a DM from him. "Let Sergey handle external. You focus internal." I stared at the words until they doubled like the IDS in my risk register. Olya pinged in our private thread. "If they cut you off from the client, the truth gets mangled." I told her I was fine and was not fine. That's the thing they don't mention about being called incompetent. It isn't a single blow. It's a slow reshaping of your spine until you fit a box you hate. I spent the afternoon flattening Jira to the shape of a manager who never read it. Labels so clean you could eat from them. Comments that read like press releases. Then, when the noise died, I rebuilt the risk register in a personal Google Doc I didn't share, with timestamps and the exact Slack links where each concern had been raised and dismissed. The dates looked like stitches, too. At 1842, Vlad pinged. "We found the duplication source. Client's legacy import created shadow profiles for partial signups." I asked, "Scope of damage?" He replied with a graph. It looked like a heartbeat skipping. "If we demo, we'll show inflated activation. If we don't demo," I typed back, "Maxim will call me dramatic." "So," he said, "quiet fix and pray." The next morning, the stand-up came with the same crackle. Maxim went around the circle assigning tasks with the even rhythm of someone counting coins. "Vlad, capacity for the merge?" "Tight," Vlad said. "Possible if we cut the personalization flags Sergey promised." "We're not cutting," Sergey said smoothly. "We'll show a subset." "Subset equals lie," Olya muttered. Maxim pretended not to hear. "Artem, remove red labels from Jira. We're alarming the client." I looked at my colorless board. "Already green," I said, and felt instantly ashamed for how small that sounded, how much I'd already complied. In the afternoon, the first build failed. The pipeline choked on an edge case we predicted and documented. I watched the error spit out like a cough in a quiet theater. I messaged Vlad and Olya in our thread. We spun a small, contained war room. Not the public one with calendars and optics. A real one with questions that started with, "What hurts?" The next week felt like walking on a cracked sheet of ice. On the surface, everything looked smooth. Jira tickets neatly groomed. Slack threads full of green check marks. Sergey's decks increasingly polished with animations that slid like butter. Underneath, though, I could hear the creak every time I breathed. The duplication bug hadn't gone away. We'd just duct-taped it into submission for the demo. Every time I refreshed the dashboard, the activation numbers winked at me with a kind of smug falseness, like a magician daring me to ruin his trick. Friday morning came. Maxim opened the call with the flourish of a conductor about to launch a symphony. "We are thrilled to show progress," he said, and nodded to Sergey. I was muted. Camera off. The digital equivalent of being told to sit at the kids' table. Sergey's deck lit the screen. Personalized onboarding experience. Natalia leaned back in her chair, lips pursed. I knew she hated overselling. "Let's see it," she said. The demo itself was like watching a tightrope act where you know the rope is fraying. Sergey clicked through the flow. Onboarding screens adapting to imaginary user segments. A dashboard populating with numbers that looked suspiciously too clean. In the background, Vlad and I were in another Slack thread, frantically patching the script that was holding the numbers together. Olya kept posting, "Validator failing, retrying," like a heartbeat monitor. Twice the page froze. Sergey laughed it off as screen share lag. The truth was that the validator was choking on ghost profiles. By some mix of luck and sheer brute force from Vlad's keyboard, the demo limped across the finish line without collapsing in front of Natalia. She clapped politely, the kind of clap you give at the end of a school recital. Maxim grinned like he'd just pulled off a heist. "See? Smooth as silk." Then Natalia asked, "Can you pull up real-time numbers for the control cohort? I want to compare against the baseline." My chest tightened. We didn't have a control cohort. It was buried under the duplication mess. Sergey froze for half a second too long. "We'll prepare that for the board review," he said smoothly. Natalia tilted her head, not buying it, but she didn't press. When the call ended, our internal Slack lit up with fireworks. Maxim, "Well done, team. Client is happy. Sergey nailed it. That's how it's done. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. The three of us who'd spent the night patching, me, Olya, and Vlad, got a single line. Thanks for support. It felt like being erased in real time. Later that afternoon, Maxim sent a new calendar series. Client status calls, invitees, him, Sergey, and 2 marketing leads from Natalia's side. I wasn't on the list. I refreshed twice, convinced it was a glitch. Then I saw the DM from him. We need clean messaging. Too much detail spooks the client. Sergey will be face. You'll back end. I stared at those words until my throat burned. The phrase spooks the client echoed, because Natalia had literally asked me to keep her in the loop. This wasn't about spooking her. This was about control. The next few days blurred into late nights and anxious mornings. Without direct client contact, I became a ghost in my own project. Sergey paraphrased my updates into slogans. Maxim rewrote risk notes into progress highlights. Olya vented privately. They're whitewashing the whole thing. You're the only one who actually sends warnings. Vlad just sent graphs. Spikes of errors muted under smooth averages. On Tuesday, the crack in the ice finally split. A compliance audit ran on the staging environment, triggered by Natalia's legal team. They found that migrated users from the old app weren't carrying over their consent flags. In plain terms, thousands of users looked like they'd opted into tracking when they hadn't. It was exactly risk number 2 from my original register, the one Maxim had called catastrophizing. The Slack thread erupted like a grenade. Legal flagged it. Natalia asked bluntly, "Why wasn't this raised earlier?" Maxim replied instantly, "We're addressing it now. It surfaced in the latest build." I felt heat rise up my neck. It wasn't true. I had raised it. I scrolled back, found the timestamp note from 2 weeks ago, where I'd written, "Consent propagation risk for legacy users. Urgent." Maxim had commented, "Remove, not client-facing." I hovered over the message, finger trembling over the screenshot shortcut. I wanted to blast it into the channel like throwing evidence on a courtroom table, but my stomach clenched. If I did it wrong, I'd look like the dramatic one again. So instead, I copied it into my private doc, adding another stitch to my growing quilt of receipts. By evening, Maxim called a crisis huddle. His tone was sharp but rehearsed. "We need to get ahead of this. Sergey, draft comms. Artem, quietly work with Vlad on a patch. Don't overexpose this," I asked, calm as I could manage. "Shouldn't we notify Natalia directly? It's a compliance issue," he glared. "You're not authorized to speak to the client, understood?" Something in me cracked, just like the ice. I didn't argue. I just wrote "understood" in the chat. Then, after the meeting, I opened Natalia's last email again. The one where she'd said, "Please keep me in the loop." I stared at the words until they pulsed on the screen. My fingers hovered over reply. In the end, I didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I built the patch plan with Vlad, detailed every step, and tucked it into my doc. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment. But that night, lying in bed with my phone glowing too bright in the dark, I knew the moment was coming whether I wanted it or not. Because when a client asks a simple question, "Why wasn't this raised earlier?" the truth doesn't just disappear. It waits, heavy and patient, until someone finally puts it on the table. And when that moment comes, either you're the one holding the receipts, or you're the one caught pretending there was nothing to see. By Wednesday morning, the walls had started closing in. I checked my calendar and saw only gray blocks. The client calls I used to anchor my week were gone. It was like someone had deleted me from the story we were telling Natalia's team. Instead, I was an unseen pair of hands fixing code while Sergey delivered polished lines to the client. I didn't even know what half of those lines were anymore until the fallout hit us internally. At 9:12, Olya pinged me privately. "Did you see the compliance flag from legal?" Of course I had. The consent propagation bug wasn't a footnote. It was a landmine. They're spinning it as unexpected edge case, she typed. "But your register called it weeks ago. Are you going to say something?" I stared at her message, fingers frozen. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But Maxim had made it very clear. No client-facing commentary. Then, the client status call recap arrived. Sergey's summary. Identified minor consent state discrepancy. Patch in progress. No impact to timeline. My stomach turned. Minor. It wasn't minor. If the board asked, it could tank trust completely. That afternoon, Maxim scheduled a leadership sync without me, then messaged, "Artem, just monitor builds. Don't join." I watched the notifications slide across my screen like a locked door. By evening, Vlad sent me a graph. Duplicate profiles were dropping as we merged identifiers, but the consent state patch was still leaking errors. "If we push Friday with this half fixed," he wrote, "they'll catch it." I typed back, They already did. Natalia asked in writing. He replied with a single word. Shit. I sat staring at my inbox until nearly midnight. Natalia's question, why wasn't this raised earlier, was still bold, still unanswered with honesty. Maxim had dodged. Sergei had polished. And me? I had the receipts. The Slack thread from 2 weeks ago. His comment dismissing my red flag. The Jira log where he'd downgraded the issue's priority from high to trivial. Every stitch of it was sitting in my dock. A quilt of proof no one wanted to see. Thursday morning brought the breaking point. A test run collapsed under the weight of ghost accounts. Instead of clean numbers, the dashboard spat out duplicates and gaps. Olya swore aloud on the call. Vlad groaned. And Maxim? He turned on me, sharp as a knife. Artem, why wasn't this resolved weeks ago? This is your domain. The words landed like a physical shove. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because how do you argue when the person accusing you is the one who tied your hands? The silence stretched. Sergei jumped in, smooth as always. We'll get it under control. No need to panic the client with internal noise. I muted myself and stared at the screen until the edges blurred. In our private thread, Olya wrote, he just blamed you for the thing he buried. Are you really going to eat that? Vlad followed. If you don't speak, you're the scapegoat. For the first time, I felt something shift. Fear burned into something sharper, something like anger. Not the loud, messy kind, but the cold anger that wants records, wants logs, wants the truth to stand on its own feet. I opened my doc and started highlighting. Each timestamp, each screenshot, every line where I'd raised the alarm. It looked like a trail of breadcrumbs through a forest where my boss had been happily setting fires. By noon, Natalia's assistant sent a request. Board prep materials due tomorrow. Maxim forwarded it to us with a note. Keep slides clean. No risk talk. Focus on wins. I stared at his message until the letters swam. Clean slides. No risk talk. That was when I knew. I couldn't keep waiting for the right moment. The moment had already arrived. Either I stayed silent and let the lie calcify into truth, or I laid the receipts on the table and lived with whatever came next. So I opened a new email draft. To Natalia, subject line. Clarification on consent state risk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding in my throat. I knew if I sent it, there'd be no taking it back. I'd be breaking ranks. I'd be naming the fire while my boss kept waving sparklers. But as the cursor blinked at me, another thought pressed in. Maybe, just maybe, Natalia already suspected. Maybe she was waiting for me to be the one to say it out loud. I didn't hit send yet, but I left the draft open. Save, the words starting to take shape, and as I shut my laptop that night, one truth settled deep in my bones. Silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was only protecting him. That night bled into morning without me really noticing. I'd fallen asleep at my desk, cheek pressed against the keyboard, until Slack notifications jolted me awake at 2:47 a.m. The build had crashed again. And this time the logs weren't just messy, they were screaming. Duplicate IDs, consent flags misfiring, data hemorrhaging into places it wasn't supposed to be. I rubbed my eyes, heart hammering, and jumped into the call Vlad had spun up. His voice was flat, exhausted. If we don't patch this before the board demo tomorrow, they'll see right through it. Olya was already there, running test scripts with the energy of someone running on sheer rage and caffeine. Half the flags don't propagate. The merge validator's choking, and Sergei's promising heaven in a deck. We're screwed. I opened the draft email I hadn't sent to Natalia. The words stared back at me. Clarification on consent state risk. I hovered for a second, then snapped the tab shut. Not yet. Not until I had something more solid than another warning. Not until I could show her we were actively trying to fix it. Not just screaming fire in a crowded theater. By 3:30, the war room was officially alive. Maxim joined last, yawning like he'd just been pulled from a nap. Status? He demanded. Like we hadn't been drowning in status updates for hours. Vlad explained the duplication bleed. Olya explained the failing validator. Maxim waved a hand. So fix it. And don't bother Natalia until we have a solution. Sergei, are your slides ready? I stared at him. Slides. At 3:30 in the morning, with data collapsing under us, and his concern was whether Sergei's animations would look smooth to the board. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pulled up my dock and started coordinating. If he wouldn't lead, I would. Vlad, you focus on merging identifiers. Strip everything to stable IDs only. Olya, test just the high-risk cases. Skip the rest. We don't have time. I'll build an interim script for flag propagation. Ugly, but functional. For a second, there was silence. Then Olya said, copy that. Vlad just typed, okay, in the chat. Maxim bristled. Don't start freelancing. Stick to your tickets. But no one listened. The rhythm took over. Commands flying, code committing, QA checks pinging like sonar in the dark. My pulse synced with the cycle. Build, break, patch, repeat. Hours blurred. Coffee cups emptied and refilled. By 6 o'clock, we had something that looked like a fix. Not pretty, not permanent, but enough to stand upright in front of the board without collapsing. At 7:12, my phone buzzed. An email from Natalia. I opened it, eyes blurring. Without Artem, today's board prep call doesn't happen. Period. The words hit me harder than caffeine. I read them again, slower this time. She hadn't CC'd Maxim. She hadn't CC'd Sergey. Just me. I felt my chest tighten in something that wasn't dread for the first time in weeks. It was recognition. She saw me. She knew. When Maxim finally saw the email 10 minutes later, his reaction was instant. In our leadership channel, Artem, loop me in before you respond. We need unified comms. I didn't reply. I let the silence hang. Instead, I wrote back to Natalia directly. Understood. I'll be on the call with the full status, including mitigation steps. Patch is stable enough for demo with limited scope. We're validating now. She replied in less than a minute. Good. Send me your notes. Not Sergey's slides. Yours. That was it. The crack in the ice had finally given way, and I was no longer the one sinking. Maxim was. He just didn't know it yet. By the time the sun came up, our little war room had gone quiet. Vlad slumped back in his chair, cat climbing onto his shoulder. Olya's voice softened for the first time all night. You just saved his ass, you know. She didn't mean mine. I didn't answer, because for the first time it wasn't about saving him. It was about making sure the truth finally had a voice. And tomorrow, that voice was going to be mine. By the time the board call started, my nerves were a live wire. I had barely slept after Natalia's email, but something about her words, without Artem, this doesn't happen, kept me upright. For once, I wasn't just filling a seat, I was the seat. Maxim opened the call with his usual bravado, thanking everyone for their time, promising a transparent progress update. Sergey had his deck ready, transitions slick, metrics inflated just enough to glimmer. But when Natalia spoke, her tone cut like glass. Before we review slides, I want Artem to walk us through the current state of the build and mitigation efforts. You could hear a pin drop. Sergey's cursor froze mid-hover. Maxim forced a laugh, like he'd rehearsed this moment. Of course, Artem can give some color before we get into the vision. My pulse thundered in my ears. I shared my screen. Not Sergey's deck, but my own doc. The quilt of receipts I'd been stitching together for weeks. Timelines, Slack excerpts, Jira changes, side-by-side graphs showing the duplication bug and the fixes in progress. I spoke evenly, carefully. 3 weeks ago, I flagged risks in consent propagation and duplicate profiles. These were deprioritized. The compliance issue surfaced exactly as predicted, and we've been addressing it in an emergency capacity. The patch is now stable enough for the demo, with a limited scope, no adjectives, no drama, just facts. On the other end, Natalia nodded slowly, pen tapping against her notebook. This matches what my legal team found. Why wasn't this raised earlier? The silence was brutal. Maxim finally stepped in. Well, there may have been some overemphasis on risks. Overemphasis? Natalia interrupted, voice cold. You mean warnings that could have prevented a compliance breach? Artem, send me the full register you documented, with timestamps. Yes, I said, already attaching it. My hands trembled as I hit send. But in that trembling was relief. By the time the call ended, the atmosphere in our internal Slack was radioactive. Maxim DM'd me. We'll discuss your choice of materials later. Sergey messaged privately too. Man, you didn't need to throw the team under the bus. I stared at both messages, then closed them without replying. Because for the first time, I didn't feel cornered. Within an hour, Natalia's follow-up email landed. It wasn't subtle. Going forward, Artem will be the sole point of contact for this engagement. All updates route through him. Non-negotiable. The impact hit like a wave. Colleagues pinged me quietly. Olya with a string of clapping emojis. Vlad with just, finally. HR posted a, thank you all for your hard work in the general channel, studiously avoiding names. Maxim vanished from Slack for the rest of the day. But the real punchline came the next morning, when leadership summoned me for a review. They danced around the word insubordination, but the truth was written across their faces. I had bypassed the chain of command, and the client had chosen me over my boss. The meeting ended with one clear directive. Maxim was being transitioned off the account. I was now the face of the project. I walked out of that meeting in a daze, adrenaline burning through exhaustion. For weeks, I'd been gaslit into believing I was incompetent. And yet, when the smoke cleared, the client wanted no one but me. That night, I opened Reddit for the first time in months and started typing, not out of spite, not even to vent, but because I wanted others like me, quiet workers doubting themselves in the shadow of louder bosses, to know the truth. That competence doesn't vanish just because someone louder insists it does. Sometimes all it takes is keeping the receipts, holding your ground, and waiting for the right crack in the ice to show the world what was really there all along. Do you want me to continue straight into part 6, final? Now, where the aftermath fully unravels. HR fallout, Maxim's exit, Natalia's unexpected job offer, and bring the story to a 28,000 character close. The week after the board call was the strangest of my career. On the surface, nothing looked different. Same Slack channels, same Jira tickets, same stale coffee in the office kitchen. But the air felt charged, like everyone was waiting to see which way the storm would break. Maxim didn't speak to me. He CC'd me on a few emails with one-word notes. Review. Fix. Confirm. But the swagger in his tone was gone. Sergey shrank too, suddenly polite, suddenly careful. Meanwhile, Natalia kept pulling me into one-on-one calls. She wanted details, numbers, straight answers, no polish, no slogans, just competence. And for the first time, giving that felt natural instead of risky. Then HR called me in. The manager across the table wore the practiced neutral smile of someone about to deliver a restructure. "We've decided Maxim will be transitioning to a different role," she said, avoiding eye contact. "You'll remain primary client contact. Congratulations on stepping up." Stepping up, that was their phrase for it. I nodded, but my hands stayed clenched in my lap. For weeks, these same people had watched him call me incompetent. Not one had stepped in. Now, because the client had chosen me, they were recasting the story like it had been obvious all along. 2 nights later, I got an email from Natalia directly. "Would you consider joining us in-house? We could use someone with your steadiness." My chest tightened. It wasn't just validation, it was an exit hatch. A way out of the company that had let me twist while they applauded my boss's charm. I didn't answer right away. I needed space to breathe. I went for a walk through the city at night. Headphones in, but no music playing, just the hum of traffic. I thought about the late nights, the risk registers Maxim had erased, the way my own voice had sounded so small when I said, "Already green." And then I thought about Natalia's email at 7:12, about Olya's quiet applause emojis, about Vlad's single word, "finally." By the end of the walk, I knew. It wasn't about revenge, or even about the job offer. It was about reclaiming the part of me that had been convinced, day after day, that maybe my boss was right, maybe I was incompetent, but the truth had already proven itself in front of everyone. I met with Natalia the next week. I told her I'd finish the project with integrity, see it through to a clean launch, then maybe I'd take her offer. Or maybe I'd just finally rest. She smiled and said, "You've earned the right to choose." That night, for the first time in months, I closed my laptop before midnight. I lay in bed, phone face down, and let the silence wash over me. And in that silence, something settled, a truth stronger than any slide deck, any insult, any gaslighting dismissal. I wasn't incompetent. I never had been, and now no one could make me believe otherwise again.